I have worked the service door of the Hawk faculty dining hall for 31 years, and in that time, I have watched a great many clever men fail to notice what was directly in front of them. The banquet that evening was in honor of the scholarship committee. 12 academics in dark suits and one woman in emerald, all of them pleased with themselves in the way that people are when they have been asked to decide something important. The hall looked well. The Bosendorfer sat in its alcove at the far end of the room, polished to a mirror shine, a candelabra lit on the lid. We never used it at faculty dinners. It was there the way a portrait is there, for the room to feel complete. I had worked around it for 3 decades without once hearing it played. Danny Marsh was on plates that evening. He was 26, with the sort of quietness that people who are busy mistake for vacancy. He moved through the tables the way good service staff always move. Efficiently, minimally, like weather. I had hired him 8 months earlier on the basis of a firm handshake, and the fact that he had looked me in the eye. He was the best dishwasher I ever had, and I had said as much to my wife. I knew nothing else about him, which I would later reflect, was entirely my own failure. It was Professor Cray who first noticed Danny had stopped. He had finished clearing the far table and was standing 3 feet from the Bosendorfer, not touching it, not reaching for it, simply standing close to it the way a man stands, close to something he has wanted for a long time. His tray was in his hands. He was looking at the keys. Cray was the sort of man who notices inattention in staff the way a hunting dog notices movement in the grass. Senior member of the committee, a man whose published name appeared on 3 building plaques, and who had not, to my knowledge, ever been told he was wrong about anything that he cared to remember. "Boy," he said, not loudly, but the table nearest him heard it, and then the next table, the way these things travel. "The plates are in the kitchen, the piano is not yours." There was a ripple of laughter. Polite, brief, the kind that follows a small cruelty when the room is comfortable and the wine is good. Danny turned. He didn't flush. He didn't duck his chin. He looked at Cray with an expression I can only describe as patient, and said, "Yes, sir, I apologize." He picked up the tray and took a step toward the kitchen. It was the dean, Harwick's dean, Arthur Pemberton, a man I had always considered decent, who said it. I believe he meant it kindly, or at least lightly. He was on his 2nd glass of the Burgundy, and the evening was going well, and perhaps he thought he was simply being generous. "No, go on then," Pemberton said. "If you want to play, play. Show us something." Another ripple, less laughter this time. More a murmur of the crowd settling forward to watch. Cray raised his glass without looking at Danny. The woman in emerald, Professor Eng, I later learned, the committee's musicologist, said nothing, but I saw her set down her fork. Danny stood still for a moment. He looked at the piano, then at the dean, then back at the piano. He set the tray down on the nearest side table. He crossed to the Bosendorfer and sat down. He adjusted the bench with small, careful movements, an inch back, then a half-inch forward. The room was still chatting, a low, warm murmur of people expecting novelty, expecting perhaps a halting hymn or a chord or two of something half-remembered. Cray was already turning to speak to the man beside him. Danny placed his hands on the keys and did not play immediately. He simply rested them there, eyes down, and the room did not notice, and then he began. The first phrase was soft, unhurried. It moved in a direction I could not anticipate. Not a melody I knew, not a pattern I could place against anything I'd heard in 30 years of background music at faculty events. It was his own. That was the first thing I understood, and I am not a musical man. The second thing I understood was that the room had already changed. The nearest table went quiet first. Not all at once. One person and then the next. The way people stop talking when something important happens that they cannot yet name. Cray was still half turned to his neighbor, making a point about something. And then he too stopped. Though he did not turn back, not yet. Danny's left hand built something underneath. A slow, deep architecture, like the foundation of a building settling into stone. His right hand moved above it with a precision that was also somehow free, turning back on themselves and resolving in places the ear had not expected but immediately recognized as right. There is no other word for it. The notes were right, the way a proof is right. Not just pleasing but inevitable, as if they had always existed, and he was simply the first person who had thought to find them. I don't know when the room went entirely silent. I know it was before the end of the first minute. I know this because I looked at the clock above the service door, a habit of 31 years, and the second hand was still climbing past the 12 when I realized that the only sound in the Harwick faculty dining hall was the Bosendorfer and, very faintly, the candles he played on. The composition, I refuse to call it a tune, which is what Craig had silently implied, moved through what I can only describe as weathers. A passage of bright, questioning runs, like a mind working through something it cannot quite resolve. Then a stillness, the left hand holding a single low chord, while the right hand picked out something fragile and searching above it. Then a return, not a repetition, because it was different now, colored by what had come between. The same phrases carrying more weight than they had the first time through, the way a sentence means more the second time you read it. Professor Eng had turned her chair fully to face the piano. Her hands were folded in her lap, and her expression was the expression of someone who has just been reminded of something they had nearly forgotten. I looked at Cray. He had turned back to the piano somewhere in the middle. I had not seen it happen. I only knew that he was facing forward now, his glass set down on the tablecloth, untouched. His face was not readable to me. It was the face of a man in the middle of revising something he had said. The final movement. And it was a movement. The thing had architecture. Grew from the fragile passage the way a river grows from a thin bright line on a map into something you cannot ford. Danny's hands moved with an ease that was by now almost frightening, not because of speed but because of certainty. Every phrase landed. There was no waste in it, no ornamentation for its own sake, only the music saying what it needed to say fully, note by note, until there was nothing left to say. He lifted his hands. The silence lasted longer than silences usually last. Then Professor Ing began to applaud, and she was on her feet before the second clap, and the table nearest the piano rose with her, and then the next. Within 10 seconds, the entire Harwick faculty dining hall was standing. I say the entire hall. I mean to include myself at the service door. I had never done before and would never do again, but there it was. Cray was the last to rise. He stood slowly, the way a man stands when his body is obeying something his mind is still working out. He did not whoop, which would have been false. He did not smile, which I respected. He simply stood and put his hands together and looked at the young man at the Bosendorfer, who had not yet turned around, who was sitting quietly with his hands in his lap, looking at the keys the way a man looks at something he has been carrying for a long time and has finally been permitted to set down. Dean Pemberton crossed the room. I watched him lean down and say something to Danny, and Danny nodded, and they shook hands. And Pemberton's expression was the expression of a man who understood he had done something accidental and correct. I stayed at the service door until it was over. I had plates to collect and a kitchen to close and 31 years of habit at my back. But I stood there longer than I should have, and I thought about all the evenings I had moved through this room and what I had carried and what I had not said, and what it is that a person keeps quiet inside them when the world gives them no particular reason to speak. I never asked Danny where he had learned to play like that. It didn't seem like the right question. Some things a man carries since childhood, and they are his. And the fact that he brought them into that room and laid them down in front of people who had given him every reason not to, that told me everything about him that I needed to know. He was back on plates the following evening. He moved through the tables the same as always. Quietly, minimally, like weather. But I watched the room differently after that. You do.